I miss the peace of fishing.
Hi there. In this video I'm going to give a review of Chigborough's home water fishing lake. This is a premium still water venue known primarily as a trout lake, but also holding catfish which were moved in over the course of last year, including the UK record, which is was over £150 when it was moved, and the previous record, which was £143, known as Scar. And it's also got some carp in there as well. The setting of home water itself is really attractive. The lake has obvious massive potential, and on paper it looks like the sort of venue that should offer a high-end fishing experience. And I just want to caveat this review by saying it's not intended as a hit piece. It is an honest angler's review of what we found, what worked, what didn't work, and what could be improved. First thing to talk about is cost. Chigborough Home Lake is not a cheap lake. It's £50 per person per 24 hours, and you must fish in pairs. At the time I was invoiced, I did get charged £150 for one 24-hour session, because I originally booked 3 days and then I added a day. So for that final day I was charged more, but looking on the website and at Swimbooker, I can't find a reason for that, so I have emailed them. I haven't had a response to date, but I'll update you on that. When a lake sits at this premium price bracket, your expectations naturally rise. At that sort of money, I went expecting good access, safe swims, clear information before booking, and a venue experience that matches that price. That doesn't mean that everything has to be perfect, of course, but it does mean that the basics need to be right. The booking process. The bookings were made through Swimbooker. Booking process itself was pretty straightforward. However, one important issue for me was that the lake's use as a pleasure lake was not made clear at the point of booking, but I'm definitely coming back to that point. For anglers booking a serious session, especially at premium prices, that information is definitely relevant, and you'll find out why. Kayaks, paddle boards and general pleasure use can directly affect the fishing, the swim choice, fish behaviour and the overall experience, and it should be declared, especially on Swimbooker, before you commit your money. The swims. The swims themselves had some positives. They gave access to, at least B swim gave access to an island with lots of open water in between. The swims were really spacious. I think from the pontoon back to the perimeter hedge there was about 3.5–4 meters. You have to be aware though that the lake is a multi-purpose lake, so it's used by, there's a camping site on the northern edge of the lake. There are lots of families there, and they are allowed to walk around the lake for leisure. So you get dog walkers, you get the campers walking around. Fly fishermen are welcome to fish on any of the lakes, so they move around. They're very mobile in their fishing, so they do need to get down that perimeter path. So if you put your bivvy right against the perimeter hedge, you'll have lots of people walking between you and your rods, especially at the weekend if it's sunny, things like that. I'm sure if you're fishing midweek, it's pouring with rain, you won't see a soul. We didn't see anyone during the week. The most concerning feature was the long pontoons though. I'm going to go into that more in the challenges section, but every one of the catfishing swim has a 25 foot long pontoon, which was designed with trout fishermen in mind, so it was brilliant for them, but it posed some problems for us. We're going to go on to the challenges we had now. One of the main challenges was weed. I fished Maywater in the past and that had real problems with weed, and I remember going to fish there on long chuck and seeing all around me these huge great piles of weed that had got pulled out of the lake. So it's a known problem for them, but they also know how to deal with it. However, on home water at the time we went, the weed was something else. It really was. Weed is part of fishing, and no angler expects a lake to be sterile. Weed is healthy. It provides spawning area, shelter for fry, oxygenation. However, when weed becomes excessive, it affects presentation, fish safety, bite detection, and also your ability to even land a fish. It limits where you can effectively put a bait. And in a premium venue, this is why I caveated this with the price. Normally you say your price at the end of a review, don't you? But I think you need to know how much it cost and then decide for yourself whether it was worth the money. Heavy weed should be actively managed, especially where anglers are expected to fish from a fixed swim. The weed, particularly in swim B, was a 4.5 foot wall that had to be fished on top of or over everywhere. We found pockets in the weed and we did fish to them, but whichever pocket you wanted to get to, you had to go past a wall of weed between you and there. The depths of the lake was pretty even at 5 feet. There was 4.5 foot of weed everywhere. I sent my bait boat across this weed and it constantly alarmed that I was driving through shallow water, because all it could see beneath it was this dense weed. Pontoons. Now, I talked briefly about that a minute ago, but the pontoons were really concerning. They're very long, and we certainly got some very wet weather while we were there, and those pontoons have got it's just like normal decking. Well, when they got wet, they were like an ice rink. They were really, really bad. And being that they were so long, if you got a run, you would potentially be tempted to run up that pontoon in order to get to your rods. Maybe in the middle of the night, who knows? If you did that and it was wet, there would be a considerable risk of you becoming injured. And you can imagine if you caught a fish and you were on that pontoon, then you would be moving around rods, nets, bait buckets, dealing with a fish, all while your feet are on this ice rink. It's really not good at all. Catfishing is mostly done at night as well, and we're static. So if you're there, it's night time and it's pouring with rain, you're stuck with this slippery pontoon to fish from. If you wanted to fish either side of it, you're 20 feet back now, and remember, it's weedy all the way across the lake, so now you've got even more weed in front of you, and if you caught a fish and it kited one way or the other, you've got this long pontoon which is on stilts, with which you'd have to navigate the fish around, and it could very easily go underneath that pontoon, and then you and the fish would be in trouble. This is a little bit controversial, and that is the trout behavior. I've never fished a catfish water that had trout in before, and I was excited about that, and I thought this is a really good opportunity to try something different. And I don't know anything about trout, quite happily say that. I really don't. I wasn't quite prepared for just how predatory they are, and and I really do consider them to be like freshwater piranhas. um, it just made bait presentation difficult, and created that, because they create constant interference with any bait that you put in. I mean, there are well over 1,000 rainbow and brown trout put in every year. They were jumping everywhere as we were fishing, and they are fast, agile and hungry, and we didn't see any silvers in the margins whatsoever. I tried to fish for some liveys in that lake, got absolutely nowhere. Put out sweet corn and maggots into a clear spot to the left of my pontoon, still there in the morning. Nothing had been hoovered up. There was no silvers around the pontoon whatsoever. But you expect some interference from other fish. A catfish isn't always going to swim up and take your bait, but the trout was something else, and they really dominated the environment there. So it's something you just need to be aware of. You won't be able to fish there like you would fish in a regular catfishing lake, which has got carp, some pike, perch, rudd, roach. It's not going to fish like that. You're going to be fishing in a lake full of piranhas, so anything you put in there that a predator might eat, they will get there way before anything else, and they will eat it. It does sound very negative. I promise you I will finish on a positive. But these points were all, you can overcome any of those. You can use your watercraft, you can use your fishing knowledge, your angling knowledge to get around the trout and to work around the weed. We all had to do it at some point or another. But on Friday afternoon, we're coming up to the weekend now, and the sun's come out. I hear all this shouting on the lake, and I'm like, what is all that noise? It sounds like someone's being strangled. And I came out of my bivvy and walked out onto the pontoon, and the lake up to the right of me, the top end of the lake, was full of kids on kayaks and paddle boards. And I just looked in absolutely amazement at this, because I was thinking, this wasn't declared anywhere, and it's not. If you have a look on their website, they don't say anything about this. And if you look on Swimbooker, it doesn't say anything about this. And I thought, well, for kids, it's a great place to go and do things like that, and how good for them that they're out in the sunshine getting some fresh air and enjoying themselves. And they were well away from us at the time. But I did look around, and I was thinking, there aren't any buoys, there aren't any shore markers to tell them how far to come down. I wonder if they're just going to keep going and come all the way down to us. So we kind of sat and waited and watched in trepidation, and true enough, they came down and were punting straight over the top of our lines. Now, that wouldn't have been as problematic. It is only 5 foot deep, with a couple of holes that are deeper, down to about 10 foot. But your lines are sat on top of this weed, about half a foot down. So any of these paddles or feet or anything else that are going past are going to catch on your line, and that could be a problem for them. It's dangerous for them. My line is like over 100 pounds. Imagine if some kid got wrapped up in that line. Are they going to easily be able to swim like that? There was no supervision for them at all. There were no adults there. There was no lifeguards there. It was a shit show, in all honesty. And I was really concerned that maybe these kids have come into this lake mistakenly and they shouldn't be there. So I had a look on the site. I couldn't see anything about paddleboarding on home water until you go to their camping section, and then it tells you there that you can rent this equipment to go paddleboarding and kayaking on home water, that home water is the pleasure lake. So I was stunned, and I called up the owners, and Paul was very quick to react, very quick to come down. And I'll talk more about that later on. But it just wasn't made clear to us before the booking, and I think it's a premium venue. Again, remember, it's a premium venue charging a premium price, and we're having to fish with kayakers and paddle boarders in our swim. Who would believe it? Fly fishermen, right? This shouldn't be. Obviously, we expected there to be fly fishermen. It's a trout lake, but and the fly fishermen we saw were absolutely sound. They roam around. They don't have to stay static. Very mobile. They can fish off any bank. They don't have to go to a swim. They can even fish from boats. So that's something else worth knowing. We did see a few fly fishermen while we were there, but they just gave us a wide berth. Very nice. You know, they probably were a bit confused by these people with all this equipment. And they were typically using dry flies, but they didn't catch anything. It was very hard going for them. The lake has, however, been opened up for fly catfishing. Now, the concern here is, we didn't have this problem while we were there, but the concern here is you can get boats. We were able to use a boat. This was a really fantastic, a positive thing was that we were able to use a boat, thank goodness. So that we could look down from above and see where the spots were. But it's opened up for catfishing fly fishermen, and they can do the same thing. And I don't know if the rules are strict. It certainly doesn't seem to be anybody there who are enforcing those rules, but they could be over your swim fly fishing for trout or for catfish, and that wouldn't be ideal, obviously, for many of us. But going there and being able to go in a boat yourself and fishing, that would be pretty much ideal. So, you know, if they were out there and using a wet fly, so there's a chap on YouTube. He's got a really good video out, and definitely check him out on YouTube. His name is James the Fisherman. Shout out to James, you've done a great video, and I loved what you were doing there. And I'm not throwing any shade on anybody going catfishing with a fly, and I'm sure that anyone catfishing with a fly would see somebody fishing on the shore and not interfere with them. However, you can always get that one person. I just want people to know what to expect when they get there, that they might see people in a boat fishing for catfish. And because that's not something you would see every day when you were catfishing, especially not, you know, when you've paid for a swim. So how we overcame the obstacles, like weed was the number one. To overcome the weed, we spent a lot of time trying to find clear spots. Now, thank goodness I had the RT7 with a winch cam. The winch cam was incredible. So I would be able to go along, find these very small clear spots, put the winch cam down to clarify that it was, and you're fishing down onto a clay and gravel bottom. It's quite hard, so it is a good bottom to present on, but like I say, you have to get over this 4.5 foot high weed, and then your line is coming down into this hole where you're fishing. Either that, or I'll talk about other ways that we fished. We were able to use a boat, and this made finding those spots much easier. We ended up putting down marker poles, so the marker poles were in those round areas like islands of clear bottom, so we put the marker pole in there just to make them easier to find again. A drone would work really well for doing this as well, but in the rules it does say that drones aren't allowed. But I did see some drone usage, for example, on James the Fisherman's video. So I mean the owners are really relaxed, they're really open to ideas. So I'm sure if you asked if you could use a drone and keep it in your swim, there shouldn't or wouldn't be a problem with that. You know, they're very easygoing. The fish safety matters. If there were areas where the weed was very heavy, like you had this quite picturesque, I mean it was very ornamental pondweed, but then in some areas that was covered in filament algae, and there was this other filamentous long strandy weed, and that was very dense. So if you're fishing near there and you caught a catfish, the likelihood is it's going to wrap up in all of that, and that is just dangerous. Can you imagine pulling that 150 pounder through there? I mean the thing was like 8 foot long. So what we both did, sorry, was we get our rods up as high as possible to get our lines over as much of that weed as possible, and we ended up fishing much closer to the pontoon, so that we could keep the lines off of the weed. We did think about using the island to tie off, and then you'd have your kind of washing line presentation, fishing straight down from above. But the trouble was that the island, it shallows up towards the island, so there was a lot more weed there than there was anywhere else. So about 20 feet radius around that island is solid weed, so you just can't get near it right now. So that leaves you with the option of suspending baits above the weed, and we did use dumbbells to do that. The pontoons, I would definitely recommend taking non-slip footwear of some kind. You've got to get good grip on that pontoon. When I did get a bite in the night, a bite indication, I went and I ran out to the rods. I was very cautious how I did it. Personally, I think that now the use of those pontoons has changed. I think that it would be a really good idea for the owners to put some sort of non-slip surfacing on there. I've seen places put chicken wire down. That's not my favorite solution, because edges of the chicken wire can bend up and then it catches on your landing net and you've got a rip net. So but some sort of non-slip surface, if you know, because the use case scenario has changed, yet they've tried to keep everything exactly the same as it was and haven't really modified the environment to suit the use case scenario. Dealing with the trout, right, that was the thing. You put in a pellet, gone. If you put in a live bait, 5 minutes later, gone. So what we went with was tougher baits, protected baits, larger baits, and presentations that are less attractive to trout altogether. So there were no silvers that we could see or catch on home water, but after speaking to Paul, the owner, he was very kind, very generous, and said that we could go to May Water next door and catch some live bait there. That was honestly just like pulling them out. It was so easy to get the live bait out of there, but the typical, you know, size was 6 to 8 inches. And they lasted about 5 minutes. When you put them in that trout lake, those things are just like piranha. You could use a larger live bait. That might be a way around this. I don't think they would mess with the bigger fish. And I put out chorizo one of the nights. It came back with a nice trout sized chunk taken out of it, but other than that it lasted, whereas the pellets were just going so fast. So tough baits, bigger baits, and I think it's a trout lake and they do feed on the dead trout later in the year, which we'll discuss. So I think a trout dead bait would be perfect for presenting there, and I don't think they're really going to eat it, and certainly if it was a larger portion of trout, then they're not going to get through it. So that would be another way. If you wanted to catch a trout there, I'm not sure. There was nothing in the rules to say you couldn't catch a trout. I did try to catch a trout. Certainly all the flying fishermen that came along tried to catch trout. It was very hard going. The weed made it very difficult to catch any trout at all, especially if you used a wet fly. So it would come through the water column and it would just snag on weed straight away. So you had about half a foot of water that you could take a wet fly through, or just use I would take a dry fly or a dry lure, something that goes on the surface of the water, and then it would stay above the weed. So if I were to go again, that's what I would do. However, trout are incredibly fragile, and the likelihood is after you've caught it and popped it into your live bait net and then put it on the hook, it probably is going to be a dead bait shortly after. So you may as well just get frozen trout from a bait company of some kind. Last note on the trout, and this is going to be tricky for people fishing in later in the year, is they do die off because they don't tolerate heat. They're a river fish, not a lake fish. So as the weather warms up, as the lake warms up, once it gets over 25 degrees, they die off, and that's a normal pattern for this sort of lake. And one of the reasons the catfish have been put in there is to eat the dead trout coming July, August. But when the catfish are eating those dead trout, they're not going to be interested in your hook baits. So it does limit, I think, the fishable season for catfish there. After that die off and towards the beginning of the new season, when the waters are a lot cooler, they re-add in another 1,200 trout, rainbows and browns. So just, it's another thing to bear in mind if you're planning to book late July, early August. The kayaks and the paddle boarders, dealing with that, so the venue definitely needs clear controls and clear time windows and clear rules, separating fishing from pleasure use. We're paying premium money and we shouldn't be guessing whether our swim will become a traffic lane for kayaks. I just don't think that's fair. We did report the disturbance to the owner. He was very receptive, and we discussed a few ideas with him about using buoys or visual shore markers, and he kind of liked the idea of that. He assured us, however, that the children were told not to drift into the fishing area at the time of paying for their activity. They're told then. Should these obstacles even exist at this price? This is the main question. Should a premium venue charge premium money and then have all of these obstacles? You know, the pontoon that's like ice, the weed that is just choking out the lake, the pleasure boaters. Should it have all of these challenges? Some challenges are part of fishing. Weed, weather, fish behavior, changing conditions are all part of the game. But excessive weed, slippery pontoons, undeclared pleasure lake use and uncontrolled water traffic are different. Those are management issues. At a lower cost venue you might expect more rough edges, but at this price point my expectations were higher. You can decide whether you feel that that's fair or not. The venue does have really great potential, genuinely. It's a beautiful place and it's so quiet, but the experience needs to match the cost. For me, the issue is not whether Chigborough Home Water can be a good venue. It clearly can. The issue is whether the current angling experience fully reflects the premium price, and for me it doesn't. Positive final thoughts. To end on a positive note, the owner Paul was very forthcoming. He was open, approachable, willing to listen, flexible. They let us use a boat at no charge. They were happy for us to get live baits from the adjacent lake. They were happy for us to move around if we wanted to. So it was extremely easy going. He was receptive to suggestions we made about the weed removal. We discussed with him about there's a weed removing vehicle that they use in Maywater, and we discussed with him about getting that in. We talked about weed retardants, and I did say to him it's probably too late in the season if he was going to do that, but he was open to doing it at the beginning of the next season to prevent weed, growing to the extent that it has. He was open to discussion about controlling the impact of the kayaks and the paddle boarders. We talked about buoys and things, but he was worried that would impact on our fishing and the safety of the fish. So we did talk about shore markers, and he was open to that idea. You guys will see whether he actually does it. I mean, he was receptive, but whether people actually do anything is another thing. He had a really good attitude, and every venue has their problems, but many venues, if you brought them up, I mean, the bailiffs, the owners, they can be quite upset that you've criticised their venue, but I found the owners at Chigborough to be extremely open and flexible, so that's not the case there. And I think with better weed management, with safer pontoons or removal of the pontoons altogether, clearer separation between the angling and the pleasure use, or move the pleasure use off to another lake, I'm not sure, it would become a much stronger venue. The trout will always pose a challenge, but if you go in with a strong baiting strategy, that not being pellets for sure, then you can overcome that obstacle. And I've made some recommendations over what I will do, or I would do if I went back there again. As it stands, it's a beautiful lake with promise. It has some huge, by UK standards, catfish that can only grow larger on a diet of trout, and I can't imagine what weight those guys are after that July-August trout die-off. I mean, trout are such a fatty fish as well. I mean, there is potential here for a fish that's could possibly reach 200 pounds. Who knows? If it was going to happen anywhere, it's going to happen there. These Wells catfish that really don't have to move around because they've got cover everywhere, because of the amount of weed, just filling themselves up with dead trout. Can you imagine the amount of size they could put on? But at a premium price, the venue definitely needs tightening up. We passed on our recommendations and our constructive criticism, and anyone that goes to fish there, I would invite you to do the same. Let them know, because they are really open to that advice, and if they hear it from multiple people, they might put in some of these changes and make it an absolute first-class venue for us all to fish in the future, and the upcoming generations of catfish anglers. So that's what I'm trying to achieve here, is to make catfishing a better experience for the upcoming generations, as well as myself and the present generation. And I think working together we can achieve that, without trying to bring the fishery down and launch all this criticism at them. I think they just don't fully understand the way that we fish, but they were open to hear that criticism, which was a great thing. So thank you very much for listening to me. I've droned on long enough, and tight lines, everybody. Have a great week. Bye bye.